Hola, bienvenidos. Welcome to the Americas Table, hosted by the Georgetown Americas Institute. I'm Muni Jensen, political analyst and Georgetown graduate, here to talk to leaders who have transformed their vision into reality. This time, you'll get to know a very special guest, Feliciano Reyna, Venezuelan human rights activist, humanitarian, and coalition builder. He's been involved in health and humanitarian efforts since 1995, when he created Accio Solidaria, a groundbreaking HIV/AIDS service organization. But with his tireless enthusiasm, Feliciano's work as a human rights activist expanded to health rights, citizen participation, and the impact of migration. It is no surprise that he has been recognized with many human rights awards, the latest of which was at the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Feliciano, to the Americas Table, and congratulations for all you do.
Thank you very much, Muni. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So tell us a little bit about Acción Solidaria. You founded it 25 years ago. What does it consist of, and where is it going?
Acción Solidaria started as a small organization with the idea of serving people with HIV who would not be able to access antiretroviral treatment at the time. Those treatments were just coming out in '95, and they were available in Western Europe, the US, and Canada, but not in Venezuela. And in a very short time, we were having sort of a national prevention and awareness campaign and so on, but we never thought we would be involved in a larger humanitarian program as we are today since 2016. So we have sort of, maintained our program on HIV, but we have shifted as well to this area of humanitarian action, which has been, to us, another amazing experience too.
And you're facing multiple challenges. Of course, the situation in Venezuela has deteriorated health-wise and in other aspects. What is the health situation currently, and what are the most important needs right now?
One of the issues is that the situation started deteriorating long time ago. Unfortunately, corruption has had a lot to do with that. We saw it in 2009 with our first Minister of Health who came from the military. This idea of sort of refurbishing 56 hospitals at the time, none of them were completely finished by just last year, so years after that. So our deterioration in terms of infrastructure, equipment, treatments of different kinds was already there. And then in 2016, as we walked into what is called a complex humanitarian emergency, what happened was that, again, the possibilities of responding adequately were not there. We already had a lot of problems. And adding to that, then because of the humanitarian emergency, we saw like 50% of medical personnel and 80% of nursing personnel leaving the country, migrating, because life inside Venezuela was, impossible to hold. So, it's the health situation in general, as it is with nutrition, for example, and with education. It's one, again, of an impossibility to provide sufficient services. There's millions of people affected and suffering from that.
And it has happened kind of at the same time as the political situation has deteriorated and the economic, so it's kind of a triple issue. We were talking about a correlation that you find between institutional weakness and then the humanitarian crisis.
Well, one of the things that we did, this was in 2015-16, having many of these human rights documents that we presented to, for example, the Universal Periodic Review at the UN system. When you put together all of those, reports, what was clear was that we were not facing anymore what you may have in other countries, issues with freedom of expression or repression and so on. This was a generalized effect on the vast majority of the population. And in looking at what it meant to have this kind of damage done to the population, this harm, then we got to this concept of the complex humanitarian emergency. And one of the issues is that it arises from abuses of power. It really has a root in political problems, in conflict, in these situations of corruption. And of course, you produce such an effect on the general population that at some point it becomes, again, one of a humanitarian nature.
And then the last kind of part of this whole crisis is migration, and you've been working also on that as you expand your footprint in Venezuela.
Yes, Muni, we have had to do that, but basically with colleagues who are in the borders between particularly Venezuela and Colombia, and then inside Colombia, where the response has been unbelievable and has been fantastic. To Venezuelans, leaving forcefully, that's one thing that has been understood in Colombia very well, not unfortunately, in all of the countries in the region, that this is not, large numbers of people leaving because they want to, or they want to just look for a better life for economic reasons. This is forced migration. This is a refugee situation where protection is needed for the majority. So, and this is one of those inevitable effects of a complex humanitarian emergency. The conditions at home or in the region where you live are so dire that at some point you say, either I leave or I will not survive, or my family will not survive.
You're a notorious coalition builder. How easy is it to create these coalitions and to really make all the other institutions work together, or is there challenges in doing so? I'm sure that you've faced everything.
We have, but from the very beginning, when we started with Accio Solidaria, our mission statement had a phrase that was sort of, reduce the impact of the epidemic, but we always kept a phrase that says, in coalition with other key actors. Always, we've always said that, because if you want to have an impact, if you really want your actions to reach as many people as possible, and even more now when you have millions affected, there's no other way than to, look for partners, people who already have the knowledge, the means, the possibilities, and also bring in new partners, perhaps others who do not have as many, capacities and so on, but bring them in and also contribute to their capacity building. It's the only way to reach out to, so many people affected in so many parts of the country and also in the regions. So, I see no way around building coalitions, and we have had, fortunately, Muni, we've been very fortunate to have had our colleagues in human rights, our colleagues in the humanitarian situation, in the political as well, also coming in together, reflecting, documenting, proposing lines of action, and I think it's what has made our own impact as Acción Solidaria, but also in general much more effective.
You have a really good set of connections with the international community, but I find that the response to Venezuela has been very small and very quiet compared to other migration refugee crises like Syria. Why is that? And are there numbers to back up kind of this impression that people in our region have?
It's the idea that Venezuela, there's no way that we should be in such a situation. There's no way that such a wealthy country would have the majority of its population suffering as they are. That you would have, again, a refugee crisis and not people just leaving because of whatever other reasons. So it is true, and this comes together as well with what we were talking about before. It's the sort of the political conflict. So we've seen, unfortunately, an sort of underfunding of a major crisis. The two largest refugee crises in the world are Syria's, with over 6 million people migrating forcefully, and Venezuela, which is reaching 6 million. But the regional program to respond, in the case of Syria, it's close to $6 billion. In the case of Venezuela, it's $1.4 billion. And it affects 17 countries or so. So, there is something else there that makes us, call attention to the situation and say, in spite of the political difficulties, in spite of this kind of very awkward situation in which we have, at least to some members of the international community, two governments, two national assemblies, and so on, there must be a way to be able to work in favor of those, migrating forcefully, but financing properly their response in the region, and also calling for, of course, a common position, which is something that we really need to see among all the countries affected.
And you see the political situation, the political alignments in Venezuela as a roadblock to getting all this humanitarian aid?
It has something to do with it, Muni. I think that there have been moments in which we see that it becomes very difficult to bring in as many resources as are necessary because of the political conflict. But what we have called for many times is to have a flexible kind of thinking in regards to Venezuela, an open mind in regards to it, in terms of engaging with the different actors, including those of the Maduro government. They have, the reins of power within Venezuela. They have strong partners as well, China, Russia, Turkey, and so on. So you do need to think more of the impact of the situation on the Venezuelan population, what it means to migrate for many women with children, what it means for the region, and then be able to think, again, creatively and flexibly on solutions for this situation. It's going to take a while, Muni. It's not going to change I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we will not see major changes, but we will continue to see people migrating forcefully again and having a lot of issues inside our country. So we better have an international community as well thinking in a longer term and recognizing the dynamics of power within Venezuela.
You've operated in a very difficult environment with regard to the government. How do you work within the Venezuelan government? Are they helpful? Are they opposing? You've been kind of a victim of some, sabotage for your work. What is your relationship with the Maduro government?
We hadn't had any for quite a while. In fact, again, as part of the human rights movement, we were documenting the situation inside the country in general, not only in regards to the right to health, for example. And I was at the Human Rights Council in 2019, sitting together with the High Commissioner Bachelet and expressing what we were seeing in Venezuela in regards, again, in general, to the situation of human rights and the needs to, sort of have an independent justice system, go back to the rule of law, and so on. But when we started with the humanitarian program, then we felt that it was necessary to reach out, again, in this sort of more flexible thinking, to reach out to some of those in power who would have the possibilities of facilitating our work on the ground. We were raided last year in September, our offices, unfortunately. This was sort of let's say, an independent move by one of our so-called law enforcement agencies. We had 8 of our members taken into custody. All our medicines were, taken, confiscated, and so on. But we had one conversation with our, by the time, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Arriaza. And so we called out, and fortunately, the situation was solved in a short while, in a few hours. But we have been working to create an instance of coordination and protection. We need both, because after our situation, then 2 other organizations were affected, again last year, November and December, and in early January, 5 members of another sister organization were taken into custody, spent a month in a military installation. So it is a tough, risky environment, and it requires us, again, to be as again, creative as possible, to have the conditions in order to help as many people as possible, and hopefully think, in the future for situations more related to development and rebuilding a way to live with dignity.
We were talking a little while ago about the situation with COVID in Venezuela, and it's been increasing and getting worse. Are you involved in the COVID response, or what is the situation on the ground?
We are, as an organization, we have been involved in the response, basically mobilizing what is called the personal protection equipment, the PPE. And so we've had, as part of our national distribution of medicines and supplies, that is one part of that. Not so much in regards to vaccination. Unfortunately, what was called sort of like the technical mechanism to provide vaccination has stopped. And the government has said that they have a national vaccination plan. We haven't seen it, as a population, not even organizations. And that's a huge mistake. We would need to have that, more in the open, so many more people can be helped. We're going through, I don't know what the number would be at the time, but another wave of infections. and people, the clinics have been sort of overcrowded. So it is such a serious issue, and it's not only Venezuelan, it's sort of global, that we would need a better response. It's not yet in place, and we hope, for example, that the talks in Mexico, the negotiations with the Norway as a facilitator would finally allow us to have our technical table, the COVAX mechanism and so on, and then provide support for the people.
And the UN and the US in particular, the strong players in the health response around the world, do you feel that they're doing enough, or is there something that you think that they should do better?
I think the UN could do more. I've been critical, and we have a very good engagement, but I've been very critical at many times of how things are working, because we do not have, again, the real numbers of people affected. So this led even us as a civil society to creating this mechanism called Venezuela for Humanitarian, which is a source of information in regards to the millions of people affected in health, education, lack of access to water, nutrition, living conditions, and so on. So that's one issue with the UN system. The US has been the major supporter in regards to financing humanitarian programs. This is undeniable. It's a large amount inside Venezuela, and also for the international response. 336 million were just approved, over what was there before. What we're hoping is to see more of that humanitarian financing going to local organizations. Not only us, national, with the larger capacities, but also looking at the smaller ones that are doing amazing work in different parts of the country that are eager for capacity building and as well for servicing people in need. So I'd love to see that. I hope as well that in my advocacy here in the US and continuing also in these virtual meetings to advocate for that.
So we have a Georgetown crystal ball at the Americas table. What do you see happening in Venezuela in 5 years?
My desire would be that on the political arena, that these negotiations, these talks will be fruitful, that we will be able to see ways out of the political conflict, as a way to solve, again, the sort of the structural problems in the country. A rebuilding of the justice system, of the rule of law, mechanisms for transparent, sort of public behavior, let's say. But in the meantime, I would hope to see, by that time in 5 years, as you're saying, that the humanitarian situation has taken, and this is today, priority over anything else, because there are people dying and suffering, and this is daily. So we need that immediate response, and in looking at the institutional, again, rebuilding of the country, we would also hope to see less effects on the human rights situation, and hopefully a lot of those families who were forced to leave coming back into Venezuela, or if we're receiving, from the many who are abroad, also their talents and their possibilities of contributing to the situation inside, even if they remain outside of Venezuela.
We are going to, this is the Americas table for the Georgetown Americas Institute, and we talk a lot about leadership, and you are here to be recognized with a humanitarian award, but also for your leadership in working under very complex situations. What are some of the lessons and some of the advice you could kind of share with our viewers about leadership?
If I may say something, Muni, to me, again, I go back to your question before. It's coalition building. I mean, if I'm being recognized and if I'm here today, it's because there is a lot of work behind. There are, many organizations, many individuals as well, both in Venezuela and outside. Our international partners are really one key actor in this. So if I may, offer something of advice, I'm not very good at it, but if there's something that I have learned and that has helped is to think collectively. I remember one phrase by Mandela. It was my first HIV/AIDS conference in Durban in South Africa in 2000. And when he started this talk, he said, "I come from a long tradition of collective leadership." I'd love to see that. I think that it's the way in which we can build stronger long-term responses for whatever serious issues we're facing in the social, economic, and political arena.
Feliciano, thank you so much for joining us at the American Table. You are a true humanitarian and a true leader.
Thank you very much, Muni.